Music.
Or have thought.
Intuition.
Cabbage.
Push them out. Future grows.
Connection.
It sounds good. I like it.
Okay, I better get serious. What I feel when I listen to this is that it needs punctuation of some kind. It would be nice if something went. As soon as I hear that, it's a place. I think about it in terms of geography, you know. I think I've got something going on down there. Now I want something going on up there. I want something I want a sky. What else do I want in this world? Some creatures, something that sounds like life. I can sometimes stand in that room and work for 6 hours, and I'm just making something, and it's happening, and I'm happening along with it. It's my way of making a space for myself, a place that I want to be in. When you create something, you're doing this thing that humans are very good at, which is imagining. It's a way of entering another world, looking at its values, seeing how they work out, and that tells you something about yourself. That gives you a core from which to take action. I now have 50 years of work behind me, and I talk about it now as if I had the whole thing figured out in my head, but I didn't. They were just feelings of somewhere I was going.
Can you tell us your full name?
Brian Peter George St. Jean le Baptiste de la Salle Eno.
Frank Zappa once said that rock criticism is people who can't write talking to people who can't speak for people who can't read. Brian Eno, composer and theoretician, I assure you, can do all three very well. I ask you to please help me welcome Brian Eno. It's safe to say that more people are familiar with your music than with your visual work. You're the producer for U2 and David Byrne. I wonder if, to begin, we could talk a little bit about your roots. What kind of music and other art and cultural experiences were resonant for you when you were growing up?
Actually, I know the first song that really made an impression on me was Get a Job by the Silhouettes. Because when the first time I heard that, I decided that that was great music and I would never get a job. And I never did. I've never really had a job.
So there were these things sitting on the back of a leaf. I've never seen anything like that before. And I thought, I don't think those are eggs. I think those are spiders. Little spiders. Okay, so I came back today to look at them, and I touched the leaf, which is this leaf here, and they all fell off and sort of shot off in every possible direction. Yeah, I can see one right there. Now let me see if I can take a picture of that. It's now going to come next to that stone. Got him. Look, okay, now you can see it. Now you can see what they are. Little beetles. Okay, that's pretty exciting.
I wanted to ask you about how you got into making generative music and art.
I'm always thinking about how things happen in nature. I started becoming very interested in evolution theory. I think the thing that thrilled me most about evolution was the idea of complexity arising out of simplicity. Things started out simpler and they've ramified into more and more complex and beautiful things. I realized that it was possible to make music like this. Instead of trying to specify every moment of a piece of music in advance, you're setting up a system or a process. They're sets of rules, basically, which generates music. That's where the word generative came from. That's why I used that word. So let's say that's my beginning phrase. This piece of software lets me leave out 30% of the notes. And then maybe I'll occasionally get one of those notes to repeat a few times. Okay, there it goes, one of those repeats. So I have a loop, but it's a loop that is changing each time it plays. So you're sort of sculpting something that has a life anyway. You're just watching it evolve. So I started thinking of myself as somebody who created things that would carry on having their own life. Instead of thinking, I'm going to make something and that's it, that's the end of it, that's finished, you think, I'm going to plant something. I'm going to plant the seeds of this piece of music. And then that piece of music is going to flower in thousands of different ways in the course of time. You know all of the ingredients, but you don't know the result of letting them repattern in that way. Our brain is very creative. It wants to find patterns. So one of the key aspects of generative art, assuming that audiences are intelligent participants, the audience's brain does the cooking and keeps seeing relationships.
Music almost by accident. I was invited around by Andy and Brian just to tape some of their songs. While I was there, I began showing them some of the things you could do with a tape recorder other than just record music with it. Andy had a synthesizer and I was quite naturally interested in that.
Make me a deal and make it straight. Or Simon Seal, I take it. To Robert D. I show it. I hope that you don't know it, 'cause we've been around a long time. It's time to try to make the big time.
Synthesizers were quite new and nobody really knew what to do with them. I couldn't play any instruments, but here was an instrument that I could play because there was no way of saying how that instrument should be played. So I could make the rules for that. Suddenly I thought, oh, there's a whole set of tools here that I'm as well qualified as anybody else to use. there was always an ambiguity about where the sound actually came from. You know, people always used to say after concerts, I don't know what you were doing, but I think I liked it. Phil would be playing guitar. The guitar was coming into my synth, so I could do things with it, like duplicate it and copy it and change the sound. It was a way of bringing some of the things that recording studios had made possible into a live situation. That was part of the identity of the band at that point. We made sounds that other bands couldn't make.
Far beyond the pale horizon, someplace near the desert stand.
You present images of the past when you think it's a reaction to return to times.
If you take something from the past and put it in the context of other things in the present, you change it anyway. I mean, it's like creating something, something new. I mean, we don't just play rock revival. We also put it in the context of, say, electronics and oboes and the way Brian sings and so on. So it becomes a different kind of
I think if you
experience anyway.
It probably works in the sense that we take one step back and 2 or 3 steps into the future.
We wanted to start being conscious again of those things that had been rejected as show busy, like stage costumes. And we thought a lot of the people we really like Little Richard, put on a show for their audience. And we wanted to put on a show.
But you blew my mind.
Brian, you said that would embarrass your daughter just then. Will it embarrass you, or does it embarrass you looking at that?
No.
Not at all, no.
No.
You said
Do you
as
think
well.
it should?
Not at all. No. Were they happy times? Did you actually enjoy those times?
Yes, I did, but I never liked touring. And that's why I've never done it since. Touring, for me, is a waste of time. You know, 23 hours of the day spent getting ready for 1 hour of the day, really. It's very hard for me to concentrate on anything else when I'm touring. So I didn't enjoy that. And in fact, that was one of the reasons I left the band. I just want to get back to what I like doing, which is dabbling. To most musicians, I think making music is the process of reproducing something that you already have a conception of. That's never been the way for me. For me, it's a process of putting 1 or 2 things in place and then seeing how they react and trying to stimulate that reaction. So you say, what about if I put Percy Jones with this kind of rhythm, with such and such a texture, and with this title, for example? Those are the only elements that I have to go on, right? I could start with 4 elements like that. And as soon as I do that, 2 of them will interact in a way that generates a new element. It doesn't lose the original 2, but there's yet another element in the piece. So if the process is working, it breeds very quickly. Where are we? 87. I've been keeping notebooks for a long time. The oldest one in here was started when I was 14. My reasons for doing it are probably the same as everybody else's who keeps notebooks. It's a way of working out ideas. I use drawing to work out ideas. I think the main value of keeping a diary is paying attention to what you've been paying attention to. It's the process of trying to organize it enough to actually clarify it in my own mind. I have to think about now, how does that actually connect with that? This is a time when I tried to think of a new way of evaluating things I was working on. I thought, okay, I shall think of all the criteria that matter to me. Fun, work, glory, money, good exercise, and how long it's going to take. It's got some sweet drawings by my daughter, who was then 2. Oh yes, in this abstract period. So on this page you have a drawing for a light box. You have a suggestion to try to make a formant generator and a comb filter. And you also have my shopping list. It's the process of trying to organize it enough. That's when you know whether you really understand it or not. Once I've written it down and worked it out, I don't really need the notebook anymore. In fact, had I just destroyed all these diaries after I'd finished with them, I wouldn't be in this situation I am now. Having to talk about them. Don't forget, somebody's going to want to make a documentary one day. Get it all out of your life now.
I've actually spent about 80% of my time, I think, in recording studios, which suits me fine, because I'm happier in a recording studio than anywhere else, I think. If anything, the recording studio and not the synthesizer is my instrument. Can you just play that middle bit again?
With recording studios, making music became much more like painting. If you think about it, when you go to work in a studio, what you're really doing is composing a sound picture. What you're doing is making something over a period of time and building it up incrementally. And I thought, this is really what I trained to do. I was trained as a painter, and I always had that feeling about what I was doing, that I was making paintings, but they were paintings that existed in time, and we call them music. I suddenly realized there was a real space for me, actually. Somebody who could exploit the new technical possibilities that existed, understanding what you could do in a studio that you couldn't do anywhere else.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Baby's on fire, better throw her in the water. Look at her laughing like a heifer to the slaughter.
I was almost always working with people who were very undogmatic about what I should be doing, but simultaneously completely baffled by what I was wanting to do. I mean, my first managers were very supportive, but they didn't pretend that they really got it.
I was generally at the time regarded as a sort of failed glam rock star. You know, as if I had actually, that was the only thing in my life I'd ever wanted to be. There's a huge momentum attached with success, you know, it's like having a sort of line, an ocean liner pushing you along, and it's very hard to change the direction of it, I think. I felt a terrible pressure of expectation in England about what I ought to be doing. There was a sense that I ought to be doing something or other. And trying to sidestep this railway train pushing me down these tracks was very, very difficult.
I remember one piece on the album, Another Green World, which I made in tears because I just didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I had the studio booked, I had to use it, you know, studios were very expensive then. I can remember standing there playing this piece with tears running down my cheeks because I was thinking, I'm absolutely lost. I'm only doing this because I've paid this money and I've got to do something. I've got a deadline coming up. I have to deliver a record. And this piece is a little piece called Spirits Drifting. You know, it's not the most significant piece of music in the world, but it's the piece that convinced me that there's no correlation between the feeling that I'm having at the time and how the piece stands up in the fullness of time. That's the important thing. It's learning to trust yourself. The question that's been interesting me for my whole life really is, why do we like music? If you start to think about that, that is the most incredibly difficult question to answer. Because I think, in a way, we can understand a lot about human beings by trying to answer that question. I want to know, why do we like music? Why is one collection of notes nicer than another collection of notes?
We could be heroes.
This melody as opposed to that melody. That beat as opposed to that beat. What means something to us? What gives us feelings? Why do we care? I never lost interest in trying to answer that question. Why do we like music? I'm more and more starting to think that music preceded language. It was making noises together that people did first. And I think one of the thrills of music is that sense that you have that you're synchronized with something. You know, if you go to a big concert, 15, 20,000 people, the thrill of being there is not just the music. It's the thrill of being part of a huge crowd. Suddenly you stop being just this one little person and you're part of a huge tide. It's that sense of being part of a bigger you. I think it's a feeling that humans have always wanted because we're such social beings. We're hardly individuals at all, really. I think possibly the strongest drive in human beings is to belong. I think it's stronger than the sex drive, stronger than the I want to be top of the heap drive, stronger than anything really. The need to feel that you belong to something. Hello everybody. I kind of misunderstood this. I thought there were going to be about 15 or 20 people. And we were going to work on a couple of songs together like I do with my a cappella group at home. But I guess that won't be the case.
I gave my all for my dear children. Their problems still with love I share.
When you have a group of people singing together, there's a level of cooperation and telepathy involved in that. That is so beautiful to hear.
Bring them home from anywhere.
I think singing is the key to world peace, actually. And I have this idea that the more singing groups there are, the happier everybody will be.
And come back home some sweet day.
That got really good at the end. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure singing with you. Can I begin? So here they are. These were the first oblique strategies. Cluster analysis, body percussion. Look most closely at the most embarrassing details and amplify them. Take a break. I started doing these immediately after we finished the first Roxy album. So that was in 1972. We were a new band and we had a quite tight budget and a limited time in the studio. So I was just doing what we had to do and not really living in the situation that we were in at the moment. And so I started making a little list of reminders to myself, really. So I thought I have to make it so that these things stop the kind of headlong momentum and divert me, throw me off at an angle. So I thought I'll write them onto cards. And my friend Peter Schmidt had also been keeping sort of similar ideas to do with painting. And so his are very nice. I'll just read a few. Towards simplicity. The light cannot see the shadow. Every nuisance is a part of reality. So it was putting together my cards and his notes in his book that gave us the oblique strategies. The very first one I remember was honor thy error as a hidden intention. If something happens that you didn't expect, the tendency is to get rid of it because you don't know where it's going to lead you and you don't have time to think about it. So you tend to just reject it. Whereas I thought, well, if I'm working at home on my own, I often get the best results by actually following those things, seeing where that's going that I wasn't going. You always have habits, you know. Habits develop very quickly. I just think it's always worth questioning those sorts of assumptions. You know, it might turn out that they're right. It's not to say that you never ever resort to that model again, but it's just saying, what about if we don't do it that way this time? I mean, I use them when I'm in a fix, really. I don't really use them for fun that much. But it's quite fun using them if you're playing with other people. One of the games that David Bowie and I used to do was we would each pull a card and keep it secret, not tell each other what we'd got. And so we'd both be proceeding under some kind of order. And then at the end, we'd find out what it was. I remember one day when we were working in Berlin on those sessions, I guess for Heroes, we were working on something together and the piece was going through sort of quite radical transformations as it went back and forth between us. And so we'd each pulled a card and my card was change nothing and continue with immaculate consistency. And his card was destroy the most important thing. So out of that came, I think it was the piece called Moss Garden, I think came out of that. You'd never know from those two instructions. But that was fun. We used to do game playing like that. It just tilts things in an interesting way sometimes.
A lot of the recording situation for Brian and myself is sort of a what-if kind of situation. It's like there's a lot of play involved with what we do. In the late 70s, when we worked together, a couple of the guys in our band at that time found what Brian and I wanted to do kind of stupid and childish. And I guess they were probably right, but it produces great results.
What is the thing that he can put extra on your music?
I don't know. It's always a really embarrassing question for me because I'm not quite sure what it is that Brian does. He doesn't play very much. I always mix my albums. So I guess it has something to do with the fact when he puts himself into a work situation, he just changes the parameters of what you're doing more by verbalizing different approaches to what one does. So it's more kind of a philosophic content with Brian.
Working with Bowie, the most interesting thing was watching him adjust the character.
Hello, Space Boy.
And of course, the best pop singers are always inventions. They're sort of characters that you put onto stage. When you're singing, you think, who am I being now? Where am I coming from? I remember one song we worked on, he goes in and does a vocal, he comes back out and listens to it, he says, it's a bit lumberjack, isn't it? And I knew exactly what he meant. He said, I think he needs to have a bit more of a 9-to-5 job. And then he goes out and does another vocal where this character is less macho and sort of assertive and is slightly confined and slightly looking over his shoulder, you know, somebody's his boss sort of thing. Just the nature of the voice carries a message. And I think in pop music, that's always what you're doing. Who is this person singing this song?
I wish I could swim.
The record was just called Heroes. I think that concept is important because, again, the voice is heroic. The voice is a careful construction of somebody standing up and saying, you know, I'm here and I'm going to brave it out. I'm going to face it out. That's all in the voice. But
Distorting Time.
Oh, this is a lovely one. Do you want to see that one?
You're becoming the cards.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose it also goes back to something we discussed last time, which is who plays the Brian Eno role on a Brian Eno record.
Yeah, very different.
You know?
Nobody.
Which is, well, nobody, exactly. But that's why the cards are there, which is a way of saying, well, let's make it Brian Eno 3 months ago or 2 years ago when he was thinking this, which gives yourself detachment from yourself.
Right. It's like having a personality smeared over time instead of just being local, like right here and now. It also remembers other states that it's been in and can assume them. But actually, it's a very difficult problem, that of being that role to myself.
Our next category is for Best Producer. And to present the award, Mr. Bryan Ferry.
Hello. And the winner is Brian Eno for James Escape and U2 Zero.
Brian Eno, one of rock's most sought-after producers. Other credits, Devo, David Bowie, Ultravox, Carmel, John Kell, and Talking Heads.
Thank you very much. This is a big surprise. As you probably all realize, that making records, like most aspects of modern culture, is a highly cooperative enterprise, and lots of people are involved, including that sniveling coward known as the producer. Well, I'm one of those. Thank you very much.
A lot of my work as a producer was saying, where in this have we never been before? What's the thing that we've never heard before? Let's make something of that. If you do that and pull it off, it's a big thrill.
Is grammatically correct.
Just shut up.
Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4.
When I first started listening to Fela Kuti, it absolutely was like taking drugs for me. I sat there, I listened to it again and again and again. The incessant ferocity of that just knocked me out. And when I first met Talking Heads, I took them to my flat and played them this record, and I said, this is the music of the future. There's this kind of cascade of backing vocals. It's very much like what Fela was doing with the brass sections. See, it's a brass part, really. I'll play you one more that, not by Talking Heads, but this was an example of.
These are the Verbo holiday hosts
shut up!
waiting for you to fill with your family.
This is Moment of Surrender by U2. Okay, so this had a very interesting beginning. Danny Lanois and I always used to get into the studio early, so the band would walk into something exciting. We found that was a good technique for getting something going, rather than walking in and sort of listening to what we'd done yesterday or something like that. So I was playing with this loop that had a kind of strange camel-like lope to it, you know. That's it. It's... I was playing with it and trying to straighten it out a little bit. It was kind of a weird loop. But before I got it sorted out, Larry walked in and just started drumming with it as it was. And as soon as he came in, I thought, this is it. This is the big song for this album. I made the verse 2 measures longer than you would expect it to be. I've always thought that you're more likely to get a good piece of music if you start on a more complicated terrain of some kind. So this was an interesting terrain. First of all, a clumsiness built into the beat and an awkwardness built into the shape of the whole song. But that little thing, which, I don't know, it gives a signature to the thing that is very unusual. Shall we have lunch now? So I understand why. I've never really. Come on. So I was living in New York in the 80s. And that was a very exciting time, in a way, in New York, because there was a lot of activity downtown. And I was living on West 8th Street, near Washington Square Park. To set the scene, Washington Square Park was always busy. There was always a lot going on, lots of different types of things. And one of the things I saw there one day, I was walking through and I saw this one guy sitting there playing an auto harp with little hammers. And there was just this sort of little oasis of calmness around him. This turned out to be Laraji.
At the time that Brian Eno approached me with a note, I was playing music in Washington Square Park, and I usually play with my eyes closed or half closed. And of course, I was accepting donations. And after one evening of playing music, I opened my eyes, and there in the tray, in addition to money, was a note. He didn't know my name or how to get in touch with me, but obviously he had to leave early, so he left a note on how I can get in touch with him, and he expressed his interest in exploring a recording project. Within 2 weeks, we were in the studio.
So I met him and we became friends. And we made the record, I think in one afternoon, he just came into the studio and played. It's very bright, what he does. It always makes me think of, when you're looking at a lake and the sun is shining on it and there's just this constant susurration of light. And of course, what I love about it is this quiet, strong sense of being alive in the moment, which he is more than actually anybody else I know. In the early 1970s, this instrument called the EMS came along. It was called a VCS-3, and I had one during my time in Roxy. It was invented by a man called Peter Zinoviev. It was interesting because it didn't have a keyboard, so it sort of suggested that you were going to be playing it in a different way. The first one that I had was called the Putney Suitcase. That cost me £200 when I bought it, and it went at auction in the late 1990s. It sold for £16,000, and I later discovered that it was actually Bowie who bought it, because that was the instrument on which I made the album Discreet Music. That came out of that instrument. And he was a big, big fan of that album. He had this terrible time when he really had a bad coke habit. For months he was fighting it. And to his credit, he won the fight. But he told me years later that the only music he could listen to in that time was discreet music. He was on a tour and fighting this thing and sitting in the back of this limo traveling all over America, listening to discreet music over and over and over again. It's a very calming piece of music. It subsequently had developed this entirely second life as birthing music. And in fact, over the years, I've met quite a few women who've said, "Oh yes, Brian Eno, I gave birth both times to that record, to Discreet Music." So there are quite a few children in the world whose first impression of what life would be like was that.
You know, the computer revolution was sold on the basis of a lie, actually. We can give you as many options as you can imagine. You can do absolutely anything. And in fact, a lot of synthesizers are designed that way. You know, you buy a synthesizer and it has 6,000 instruments in it, basically. This huge amount of choice is considered to be a great idea. Whereas to me, it's a nightmare. It's a kind of illusion of freedom, which actually turns out to be very confining. You know, why do people keep going back to using instruments as simple as that electric guitar. They do it because since there are so few choices, you very quickly can develop a relationship with the instrument. This is the message that people keep coming back to and learning again and again, I think, with technologies and culture in general, that for the thing to have meaning, it must have limits.
I was working with Devo in Germany at Connie's studio, famous Connie Plank, and they were difficult sessions actually. Devo were very spiky. I have to say, one of the most gifted bands I ever worked with, I think, but they weren't easy to work with.
Can't get no satisfaction. I can't get me no satisfaction.
They had demoed hundreds of times every single song. They came with a trunk of demos that big. And occasionally somebody would root into the trunk and pull out a cassette and say, "This is the drum sound we want." And this was a set of drums that had been recorded on an unidentified crap microphone in a garage somewhere in Cleveland. And I remember coming home back to London after a week with them, completely sort of shell-shocked by dealing with this wired, spiky group of people who were very opinionated about everything that happened. Anyway, I was sitting in this airport one Sunday morning, and it was the new Cologne airport. It had just been built. It was a beautiful sunny Sunday, and the airport had a huge glass front, so there was just sun drenched through this whole beautiful building. It was designed, funnily enough, by the father of one of the founders of Kraftwerk, Florian. His dad had done this, and it was fabulous. But the only thing that didn't work was that the person in the cafe had German disco music playing at full volume through the whole airport. And I thought, this is quite bizarre that you would spend all that money designing this amazing place in which every detail had been thought about, except the place was drenched in this completely crap sound. They shouldn't be playing this. What should they be playing? And I was just speculating on what would be the right music for a space like this. So then I thought, well, I'll try to make it.
What are we meant to get from it? Could you define its function? I mean, is it a relaxing piece, or...?
I think it might be relaxing in the sense that it separates you from the fear of death that you always feel in an airport. And I started thinking about airports a long time ago and thinking about what kind of music they play. And the music they play is designed to sort of paper over the cracks of your naked fear, you know,
yes,
to sort of tell you that everything's going along just as normal and it's all fine and so on. Well, I thought it might be better to actually change people's mental conditions so that they didn't mind the idea of dying so much. So what I was trying to do here was to make something that put you into a different state of mind where you weren't clinging so desperately to the idea of being alive and where the threat was reduced. Now this sounds a bit bizarre, but I think it's a very good idea, the idea of reducing your own importance in your own eyes, of creating a context where you shrink somewhat in importance and you have a sense of the feeling of being in a big world where you don't matter so much. You know?
And getting
was very interesting. You know that descending figure you were doing at the end? You started doing that exactly where the solo part starts. Yeah, it's a real nice coincidence that that happened. Beautiful, I think.
Do you want to run from the top and I'll do the odd throwaway squirtle?
Yeah, exactly, yes. That's all we need, some squirtles. How do we hit 0? How do we get to 0 here without having...
Do you want to sort out a track?
This sound actually reminds me of Eddie Calvert. Do you remember him?
Yes!
It's
Oh
exactly
My
his...
Papa.
Oh My Papa, yeah, it's exactly his trumpet sound. That was absolutely brilliant. I thought that there'll be guitar players who'll base a whole career on that solo, I'm sure.
In the early 1990s, I made an album for Warner Brothers. I'd sat down with them and said, when are we releasing it? Because it really matters to me to have a deadline and actually to know what season it is. That was the most important thing for me, because I would definitely not release the same music in summer as I would in autumn. So they said, yes, okay, it's going to come out in October. And I did the whole thing thinking of October.
There's this song I have called The Rape Among the Corn, which is an agricultural allusion to the fact that this stuff called rape grows in corn and farmers don't like it.
The original album was called My Squelchy Life. It was a finished record. It had a whole video and everything. And then they said, do you know what, we can't, there's so much product coming out in October, we're going to shift this to March. And so I just cancelled the release of the album. It's so important to know, when is this coming out? What kind of people are going to hear it? What situation are they going to hear it in? And of course, a lot of that is slightly unknowable, but some of it is knowable, and it makes a difference to me if I know it. For instance, I have an app called Reflection, which I did with my friend Peter Chilvers. And the interesting thing about that app, apart from that it makes nice music, is that the algorithms running the music, their rules are slightly modified throughout the year. Something playing in autumn has a different rule set from something playing in spring. And so at any point in the year, there's a sort of unique set of rules that is running the piece at that moment. And we released this about, I don't know, 5 years ago, perhaps, something like that. And people are just starting to realize that it sounds different in, you know, winter midnight than spring midday or something.
That's interesting.
Yeah, we didn't tell anyone at the time. We just built that in.
Yeah.
And people are just starting to notice it now. Because we come from a Western technological culture, really, one which regards nature as something to be mastered and exploited, we tend to value all of the capacities to do with control and command of situations. Western culture now depends so heavily on that it's lost touch with the possibilities of surrendering. When do we surrender in our lives? Sex, drugs, art, and religion. Places where you enjoy the loss of ego, if you like. so much of the things we really like doing that we think, that was an amazing time I had, they're to do with stopping being you. You merge into something. The idea of surrender to me is the idea of learning how to adapt. How to say, okay, now I have to become malleable and I have to deal with the circumstances, or I'll be destroyed by them. I want to rethink surrender as an active verb, not a passive verb, as a strategy that you use.
This is sort of the center of this thing, and it came out of I suppose out of a lecture I did a few years ago at the Museum of Modern Art, where it was part of a show called High Art, Low Art, and it was a pretty dreadful show, because the message of the show was, isn't it wonderful that proper artists can take the rubbish that popular artists do and turn it into something good? That was the sort of message underlying everything, that there was all this junk around the world, and if you got a decent artist like a Warhol or a Lichtenstein or someone like that, they could turn it into something wonderful. And I thought, hold on, that's not how I see it at all, you know. I think this process happens in every direction at once. So I objected to that idea, because I thought that was saying, well, pop is this kind of undifferentiated field of nothing in particular interesting, but put it in the hands of a genius, and suddenly you have art with a capital A. Whereas what I want to say is that everybody's making art. That's what we do. That's the distinguishing thing about our species, is that we all make artistic decisions all the time. You know, everyone in this room does it. It happens to be my job, but all of us whose job it specifically might not be are still doing it.
So is art more related to nature for you than to life?
Christ, I don't even know what either of those words mean.
My thoughts are always divided between what I'm doing artistically and what possible relationship it can have to the rest of the world. And by that I mean the political world, you know, the world of resources and climate change and breakdown of civilization. For any artist, I think that has to be a very difficult question at the moment. You have to be thinking, does this have any relevance, all this stuff I'm doing? Does it make any difference to anything? Could it make any difference to anything? I think one of the sort of long-term inspirations for being an artist at all for me was that I grew up in the country, and I've always drawn on that experience of rural life and the feeling of watching how nature works.
Look, there's a little fish down there. For me, the river was always a way of going somewhere. Every child here, I think, in this town spends a lot of time around the river because of all the mysterious things that live down the river that don't live elsewhere, and because you can go swimming there and catching eels. And there's an idea about water that I like, which is that it's constant but not solid. So the river is always going somewhere. I mean, a lot of the songs I wrote are about being on rivers.
I started to realize that I was doing this on a planet that was suddenly quite noticeably getting worse, actually. I thought, well, here's an odd paradox. Here I am sort of celebrating nature and taking inspiration from it. And at the same time, I'm watching it disappearing. Let's acknowledge that without it, none of us would be doing anything. We've got to start looking after it. I'm encouraged by an English environmentalist, Tom Rivett-Carnac. He said, we always overestimate what we can do in a day and underestimate what we will do in 10 years. And I think that's a very encouraging thought, because human capability is increasing exponentially, just as environmental threat is increasing exponentially. The only way we can hope to survive is by dealing with a lot of separate issues. We have to have a new economics, we have to have a new sense of justice, we have to have a new relationship with the planet. We wanted to solve all those problems anyway. Climate change just gives us a really strong incentive to get on with it. The optimistic side of me says, if we get through this, we'll be in a better world. I mean, a much better world. It'll be a new place. I've just realized this must be where the professional dog walkers congregate. Go and walk the fucking things. Don't stand around here. So it's wonderful being an artist and every day getting up and thinking, what shall I do today? But it's actually a bit terrifying as well. You know, every day you have to think out, so what am I going to do today? You know, of all the things I could do, what shall I do? And some days you just don't answer the question properly and you spend a day sort of fiddling. I used to get up, make tea, make breakfast, read emails, read things, articles, whatever. And the whole thing took about an hour, what I would call breakfast time. And then this year I decided, what about if I stop having breakfast? I started to realize that you can't do input and output at the same time. So what I had been doing, get up in the morning, input, food, drink, news, you know, emails, blah, blah, blah. It was just all in. And when I wasn't doing that, when I just sat down and stopped, stuff started coming up from inside. I started remembering ideas from a long time ago, and it's really sorted my life out quite well. I don't go into the day with a kind of muddle of stuff that I've already taken in, then all the things I have to remember to do and people I have to call and so on. It kind of smooths everything out quite a lot. And then I look forward to having my breakfast at midday. And Jesus, do I look forward to that. Like now, I am so hungry. You can't believe how hungry I am. Is it anywhere near 12 o'clock yet?
It is 11:30.
By the time we get back. When I'm working in the studio with people, I have a no buts period. So in the no buts period, nobody is going to say, yeah, but if, you know, Sometimes you just do not want somebody picking the seeds out before they've even had a chance to germinate. I think you have to be very careful right at the beginning of something. It's very easy to argue things out of existence at that point. I have in my mind a child who loves playing and a critic who's always trying to see what's wrong with it. And sometimes you just have to shut the critic out of the room and just say, sorry, we'll talk to you tomorrow. Today we're having fun. And sometimes you have to get the child out of the room. Sometimes you have to say, okay, you've had your fun, now I've got to finish it. Both of those voices are in all of us, I think. Taking it. I had been studying cybernetics sort of from the late 60s onwards, and there's a famous essay by Warren McCulloch called What the Frog's Eye Tells the Frog's Brain. The way a frog's eye works is rather interesting. It stays fixed on the world outside, and because of the saturation effect of rods and cones in your eyes, it stops seeing anything at all. I don't know if you've ever done this, where you can, if you stare at something for long enough and stop your eyes from scanning, which is their tendency, you can't see it after a while. But what you can see is if anything moves. So the frog's eye is a way of filtering the landscape for flies. And so I realized that when you're listening to highly repetitive music, your ears start to habituate and disregard the repetitive material, and they start to hear the differences. So suddenly these tiny moments in the sound become the piece. And you're hearing something that, in a way, is really a reflection of your own auditory system at work, your brain at work. Yes, I can hear him now. I don't have any fly spray, unfortunately. I would unsentimentally use it, and I just broke my fly swat. Violence is the only language they understand.
The music went out, another one came from that window.
Oh yeah, okay. Good.
Glad we got that on camera.
So I'll go back to that story again. Sorry.
Tea is filled.
All good. I don't know what I'm going to do.
Why do you like the omnichord?
So, isn't that the funnest instrument ever? And if you aren't very sophisticated about chords, which I'm not, I'm not a good keyboard player, you can not only play major chords and minor chords, but funny chords with names I don't even know, like that, and that, and that. You can make disgusting jazzy music with it. Music that you would never wish on your worst enemies. anyway, the Omnichord is a democratizing tool. It makes all chords equally available.
Was there a period where you were using it, like when it first came out, were you using it?
Oh, a lot, yes.
Yeah.
In fact, one of my most successful pieces of music in financial terms is almost entirely played on this instrument. It was on the first Apollo for All Mankind. In July '69, I had just moved to London, and I was living next door to one of my professors. And he said, "Oh, why don't you come over? They're landing on the moon today." So I went over and we sat looking at this quite small television, which was black and white and not very impressive. But what was amazing was looking at that and then looking out of the window, it was a full moon, and thinking, oh my God, that is actually happening there, now. And this was one of those moments when you think the world has changed. A filmmaker called Al Reinert discovered that NASA had over 6 million feet of film that they had made during the Apollo missions. So he decided to watch it all, and it made a really beautiful film. He asked me if I would make the music for that. First of all, I wanted to discover what the astronauts were listening to, because I knew that they all had the option of taking one cassette tape into space with them. And they nearly all took country and western, which I thought was very interesting, that going out into space, you would literally take that Star Trek message, space, the new frontier. And so they took frontier music. I thought, how lovely to do space music that's a really expanded psychedelic version of country and western music. And it worked very, very well with the two friends I was working with, my brother, Roger, and Dan Lanois.